The morning sun cast long, amber beams through the tall, arched windows of the Metropolitan Courthouse, illuminating the fine dust motes that danced in the quiet air. It was a place where human stories, fractured by disagreement and clouded by memory, came to be sorted into the simple truths of right and wrong. The grand courtroom, known to many as a sanctuary of absolute clarity, hummed with the quiet anxiety of those waiting for their names to be called. Among the crowd sat people from different walks of life, each carrying a bundle of grievances, receipts, and deeply held convictions. The heavy wooden double doors creaked open as the bailiff stepped forward to announce the commencement of the proceedings. The voice of the officer echoed through the high ceilings, commanding the court to come to order. All individuals in the room rose in unison, a collective gesture of respect for the institution of justice. Standing at the center of this theater of human nature was the honorable judge, a figure of immense wisdom and sharp perception, whose gaze could pierce through the most elaborate fabrications within a matter of seconds. With a gentle wave of the hand, the judge permitted the assembly to take their seats, and the first chapter of the day began. The clerk called out case number 3049, announcing the dispute of Casey versus Casey. Two individuals stepped forward to the polished wooden podiums. On one side stood Mistress Mary Grace Casey, a woman whose face bore the visible lines of decades spent managing a household on her own terms. On the other side stood Mr. Roderick Casey, her former husband, a man who kept his posture rigid and his expression carefully neutral. They had once shared a life, a marriage that began in the year 2000, but that bond had dissolved into a divorce in the year 2014. What remained between them now was not affection, but a ledger of unfulfilled expectations and the shared lineage of two young boys. The judge looked over the initial complaints, establishing the foundational facts of the family history. The two children of the marriage were now young men, one aged 20 years and the other aged 17 years. Mistress Casey presented her claim with a tone of practiced grievance, asserting that her former husband owed her a significant sum of money for specific expenses related to their older son, Noah. These expenses included substantial car repair bills and a sizable medical bill for dental surgery. According to her narrative, Mr. Casey had explicitly agreed to cover these additional costs during a period of shared hardship. Mr. Casey, however, shook his head softly. His defense was simple and unyielding. He maintained that he had never entered into any such agreement. In his view, his legal and financial obligations toward his eldest child had concluded the very moment the boy reached the age of 18 years. He argued that he fulfilled every requirement set forth by the original divorce decree, and that any expenses incurred after the boy attained adulthood were no longer his responsibility. The judge began to probe deeper into the timeline, recognizing that the truth of any contract lies in its specific details. Mistress Casey confirmed that when the divorce was finalized in the year 2014, a child support order was put into place after a 2-year separation. The order mandated a total monthly payment of $600 for both boys, a sum that was to continue until each child reached the age of 18 years. With a bitter edge to her voice, Mistress Casey recounted the morning her oldest son turned 18. She claimed that Mr. Casey called the court immediately that very morning to terminate his support obligation for that child, stopping all payments instantly. The boy was now 20 years old, meaning 2 years had passed since that transition. When questioned about the young man's current situation, Mistress Casey explained that he was employed full-time as a manager at a fitness center. He had been working in the capacity for approximately 6 months, having previously balanced his employment with part-time schooling. Crucially, the 20-year-old son still resided at home with his mother. The judge looked at the plaintiff with a questioning expression, asking whether the adult son paid rent. Mistress Casey hesitated, offering an uncertain sound instead of a clear answer. The judge cautioned her to be precise. Mistress Casey then admitted that he paid very little, explaining that he earned only $9.98 an hour, which amounted to roughly $600 every 2 weeks. She argued that this income was insufficient for him to cover his own major expenses, which was why she had turned to her former husband for assistance. According to Mistress Casey, the car repairs had occurred in the spring of the year 2023, specifically on March 17th and again on May 16th. The dental work, which involved extraction of wisdom teeth, took place on May 15th of the same year. The judge pointed out the inherent contradiction in the narrative. The son was an adult, working full-time, living at home rent-free, and yet the mother was demanding that the father pay for these everyday emergencies. Mistress Casey defended her position by stating that the boy lacked health insurance and simply did not possess the funds for the dental procedure or the automotive maintenance. She claimed he spent his meager earnings entirely on gasoline and groceries for the entire household, an assertion that the judge received with open skepticism. The court then requested to hear the exact circumstances of the contract that Mistress Casey claimed existed between herself and her former husband. She began to describe a period in October the year 2022 when Mr. Casey was experiencing severe personal and financial difficulties. Out of compassion, she had allowed him to move into her home and sleep on her living room couch until he could regain his financial footing. Mistress Casey testified that during this arrangement, she had told him that she would help him, but in return, he needed to assist her with the boys, specifically mentioning the upcoming dental surgery. She claimed that he had agreed to this arrangement. The judge listened intently before delivering a fundamental lesson in the law of contracts. Even if Mr. Casey had uttered words of agreement on that couch, the judge explained that such an understanding was entirely invalid and void for vagueness under the law. A legally enforceable contract requires specific, definitive terms. A vague promise to help out with the boys does not constitute a binding legal obligation, especially for expenses that had not yet occurred and whose amounts were completely unknown to both parties in October of the year 2022. The judge noted that neither party could have anticipated the exact cost of the dental work or the car repairs months before they happened. Mistress Casey became defensive, insisting that her former husband's mother was fully aware of the situation and understood the ongoing need for financial assistance. The judge maintained that the opinions of family members did not alter the legal reality. Mistress Casey then shifted her narrative, claiming that she had communicated the exact figures of the bills to Mr. Casey's mother, as he refused to take her direct phone calls. She asserted that after receiving the information, Mr. Casey had called her directly and promised to pay the bills. The judge expressed deep disbelief regarding the sudden change in testimony, noting that Mistress Casey had just stated she only spoke to him through his mother. Mr. Casey firmly denied ever making such a call or entering into any agreement. At that moment, an elderly woman sitting quietly in the gallery raised her hand. The judge noticed her and requested that she stand and identify herself. The woman stepped forward with grace and dignity, revealing her name to be Mistress Casey as well, the mother of the defendant and the grandmother of the two boys. When asked if she recalled a phone call regarding the dental bills from May of the year 2023, the grandmother spoke with absolute honesty. She stated that she remembered the event perfectly because she was the one who had actually paid the entire bill of $2,300 directly to practitioner. She had accompanied her grandson to the appointment, witnessed the extraction of his teeth, paid the fees, and driven him home herself. The courtroom fell into a profound silence as the truth came to light. The judge turned back to the plaintiff, demanding to know why she was suing her former husband for a debt that had already been settled by his own mother. Mistress Casey attempted to clarify that she was seeking reimbursement for the associated prescription costs and insurance co-payments, arguing that she owed the grandmother money and that the grandmother had spent well over $100,000 assisting the family since the divorce in the year 2014. Recognizing the lack of candor in the plaintiff's case, the judge promptly dismissed the lawsuit. The judge expressed deep appreciation for the extraordinary generosity of the grandmother, who had voluntarily assumed financial responsibilities far beyond any legal requirement, simply out of love for her grandchildren. As the parties were dismissed, the grandmother and grandfather left the courtroom with their heads held high, embodying the true spirit of family devotion, while the judge prepared for the next matter on the docket, leaving behind a powerful lesson on the value of honesty and the beauty of selfless grandmotherly love. The afternoon session commenced with a noticeable shift in energy as the clerk called case number 3052, Jessup versus Thomas. The two young women who stepped forward to the podiums brought with them an air of unresolved tension and modern grievances. Miss Poopy Jessup, the plaintiff, carried a thick folder of printouts and photographs, her expression filled with dramatic intensity. Opposite her stood Miss Tabitha Thomas, her former roommate, who maintained a calm, steady demeanor, accompanied by a quiet confidence. The judge reviewed the filings, noting that Miss Jessup was seeking the maximum statutory compensation of $10,000 for medical bills, an alleged false eviction, and severe emotional distress. The judge turned to Miss Jessup to establish how the living arrangement had begun. Miss Jessup explained that in the autumn of the year 2022, she found herself without a stable place to live. She had been searching for an affordable room when she connected with Miss Thomas. The two women had been colleagues at a high-end luxury gymnasium called HiMat, where they both worked. It was within the pristine, energetic environment of the fitness facility that they discovered their mutual need. Miss Thomas had an available room in her apartment, and Miss Jessup was eager to find a secure residence. In the beginning of November the year 2022, Miss Jessup visited the apartment, inspected the room, and decided to move in immediately. When the judge inquired about the existence of a written lease agreement, Miss Jessup confirmed that no such document was ever created. She claimed that Miss Thomas had told her not to worry about formal paperwork, a detail that the judge noted as a significant error in judgment for both parties. Miss Jessup had resided in the apartment for the duration of November and had paid her rent for the month of December. However, her tenancy was remarkably brief, as she permanently moved out of residence on December 31st of the same year, having lived there for only one single month. The judge then directed the focus of the hearing to the core incident of the lawsuit, which involved an encounter with Miss Thomas's dog, an energetic golden retriever and terrier mix named Eddie. Miss Jessup alleged that on December 9th, while she was participating in an important online academic meeting with her university professor via a video conferencing application, her other roommate entered the bedroom accompanied by the dog. According to Miss Jessup's dramatic retelling, the dog suddenly leaped upon her and bit her arm, leaving her bleeding profusely and deeply traumatized. She displayed her arm, pointing to what she claimed was a permanent scar near her elbow, and insisted that she had been forced to flee the room in absolute terror. The judge examined the medical evidence provided by the plaintiff and immediately noticed a significant discrepancy in the timeline. Although the incident occurred on December 9th, Miss Jessup did not seek medical attention at an urgent care facility until nearly a full week later. The medical report indicated that the patient presented with a chief complaint of a minor bite wound on the left upper extremity and a scratch on the elbow. When asked why she waited an entire week to see a physician if she was bleeding and in fear for her life, Miss Jessup explained that she did not possess health insurance at the time. She admitted she was terrified of the potential medical costs and had spent the week hoping that Miss Thomas would step forward and offer to pay for the care voluntarily. When no such offer was made and her anxiety grew, she finally visited the clinic. The total cost of the medical treatment was exactly $80. The judge then examined the photographs taken by Miss Jessup on the day of the incident. The images displayed her leg, which showed a dark bruise and 3 very small, superficial scratch marks. Miss Thomas was then given the opportunity to present her version of the events. She explained that her dog, Eddie, was a friendly and gentle companion who simply wished to sniff Miss Jessup, as the new roommate had only been living in the apartment for 13 days. Miss Thomas testified that Miss Jessup possessed an undisclosed, severe fear of dogs. Every time Eddie approached her to greet her, Miss Jessup would react with extreme panic, physically pushing the animal away and screaming. On the afternoon of December 9th, when the dog entered the room, Miss Jessup began to scream hysterically and swat at the animal. Miss Thomas explained that the dog's nails had inadvertently scratched Miss Jessup's leg during the commotion. Miss Thomas immediately intervened, restrained the dog, and offered medical aid. She repeatedly asked Miss Jessup if she required assistance or wished to visit a doctor, but Miss Jessup declined all offers of help. Furthermore, Miss Thomas revealed that shortly after the incident, Miss Jessup took a thorough shower, dressed in elegant attire, and left the apartment to attend a high-profile public event. Miss Thomas presented printouts from Miss Jessup's public social media page, which proved that the plaintiff had spent that very evening attending the Grand Los Angeles Christmas Parade, smiling and actively interviewing various celebrities on camera. Miss Jessup attempted to dismiss the relevance of the social media photographs, claiming that the event was a requirement for her studies, and that the defense was merely attempting to use her personal life against her. The judge, however, found the evidence to be highly telling. It was clear that an individual who was genuinely traumatized and bleeding severely would not immediately dress up and spend the evening joyfully socializing at a public parade. The judge concluded that Ms. Jessup's claim for $10,000 for emotional distress and false eviction was entirely unfounded and driven by a desire for an unearned financial windfall. The judge characterized the plaintiff's behavior as a display of unnecessary drama and exaggeration. However, because the dog had undeniably caused a superficial scratch that resulted in a legitimate medical evaluation, the judge ruled that Miss Jessup was entitled to be reimbursed for the actual cost of her medical care. The court awarded a judgment for the plaintiff in the exact amount of $80, dismissing all other claims of emotional distress and unlawful eviction. Miss Thomas expressed immense relief that the year-long ordeal had finally concluded, grateful that the truth of her dog's gentle nature had been vindicated. The judge adjourned the session, leaving the courtroom with a final reflection on the importance of maintaining perspective, the necessity of personal accountability, and the wisdom of resolving minor human misunderstandings with fairness rather than greed.